Just as it is helpful for the one who is the betrayer to understand trauma, to be able to empathize with the betrayed, so it is for the betrayed to understand sexual addiction cycle, to empathize and understand in time and put in context the behavior of the betrayer.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I am glad to air the second part of a conversation I had with Kaleb Beyer on repairing the sexually betrayed marriage. In this podcast, he is sharing 6 signposts for such repair. In the last episode, he addressed 2: disclosure and trauma. We now pick up with the third signpost of triggers. I think triggers and trauma kind of go hand in hand. Explain what you mean by triggers and why understanding this is helpful.
Yeah. Think for a moment, the example of walking through a land that's filled with landmines, but you don't know where those landmines are. And so you could step on one the next moment, tomorrow. It is the ground that which you thought was stable.
So when you say landmines, what I get is a picture of, I think things are fine, and then in a split second, things are horribly wrong. Is that part of what you're bringing to picture here, is triggers will catch you unaware? Be aware of them?
Yes. Yes. They are events that happen in individuals' lives after sexual betrayal that remind them of the past. And so essentially what happens is it brings the past alive in the present. And so it feels like the felt state is, I'm walking through this very same thing again.
Let's give some examples. That trigger could be a season. It's October. It triggers in our mind a previous past October.
Yep, certain periods of the day, seeing a husband or wife, depending on who is the betrayer, on the phone or the computer. And so what's helpful, again, is for both the betrayed and the betrayer to understand that these events are going to happen. And they are painful, they're intense, and they decrease the felt sense of safety in the relationship in the moment, right? In the moment, it feels like we're going through this again.
I think what you're providing, Kaleb, is a level set. Remember, this is a journey to recovery. This podcast is about recovery and that it's possible. And there's nothing more discouraging than feeling like we're not recovered and we're going in the opposite direction. And you're giving us a level set to say triggers are going to do that. Just be ready.
Yep. We can't avoid them because in avoiding them, we end up starving ourselves of life and flourishing. That is a road that it's not uncommon for the betrayed to go down. And at some level, there is some boundaries that need to be put in place. But at the end of the day, if we cut off everything that triggers us, then we rob the opportunity of filling our lives with people and things that fill up our tank, so to speak, us emotionally.
I think that's really critical to give that awareness, to say, you know what, we can't avoid triggers. Can you also say this? I'm sure some triggers persist through the rest of life, but is there anything to say about intensity? Can a person over time move past a trigger?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there's a couple important things to consider when triggers happen. One is being able to identify that it's a trigger in the first early stages of recovery. It is not uncommon for the couple, or particularly the one that's betrayed, to not even know it's a trigger.
Yeah.
They may not know for hours later, days later. Oh, that's what happened there.
Okay.
And so just acknowledge that this is a process by which even being aware of triggers in the moment takes time. You won't be able to identify it right away.
So this is worse than a landmine, which is very understood momentarily. We know exactly what the problem is. These are events that are not so easily traced.
And part of this process that is a signpost that is helpful is becoming aware of what is a trigger, how do I respond when triggers happen, self-awareness, what do I do, what do I go to, and then underneath the trigger, there is a felt need that the spouse has. Maybe in the short term, to calm down, to call a safe, trusted friend, that I can walk through this trigger in a healthy way, be reminded of truth, be grounded again. All those pieces are important in this process. But this signpost of triggering certainly is an important one to be aware of and to be conscious of and to accept,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I like that. Let's go now to addictions. One of the signposts, the fourth signpost, is an awareness of sexual addictions or addictions in general. What is it that we need to understand here?
When a betrayal happens and there is broken trust, okay, we can think of trust in two layers. One is the known. We trust people based on what they do, their behavior. But there's also a sense of unknown. What is their intention? What is their perception, their core emotion? And we build a bridge on this in our marriage relationships over time. And when a sexual betrayal happens, it breaks that bridge. And so now those unknown pieces that I've been putting in place as the one that's been betrayed are no longer true. I thought positively. They were doing these things because they liked me and they loved me and they wanted to be with me. Now you're saying, whoa, this behavior does not communicate that. And so understanding sexual addiction and sexual integrity issues can be helpful in the sense that it's easy to fixate on behavior, the wrong behavior that is clearly wrong, that is clearly sinful, while not understanding the factors underneath the surface that fed that behavior, that fed that sexual acting out. And so being aware and understanding in appropriate time, this is not early in the process, right? But in time, understanding and making sense of how someone could act out and filling that out in a sense that there's shame going on, there's pain that is speaking to underneath for the one that did betray, and understanding the addiction cycle and how that plays out is really a helpful way to kind of, if you will, create space for the betrayed not to take all of that on, all that pain and all of the events that happened to themselves in shame.
Can you give an example to further kind of flesh this out to see, oh, this is behind that behavior?
Yep. Addictive behavior often has behaviors that precede the behavior point. And so there's a state of vulnerability, of shame, of painful emotions. So let's take shame as an example, right? Of feeling bad about oneself. The issue is that the one that is the betrayer, they didn't bring that shame into relationship, right? But the addictive cycle is one of the quick ways to release that pain, to cope with that pain, even though it's not helpful, is to go sexually act out.
Okay. I'm thinking now of the one who is betrayed really would benefit from a good, healthy understanding of addiction or sexual impropriety, and that will help them understand their spouse better. Is that correct?
Yes. Just as it is helpful for the one who is the betrayer to understand trauma, to be able to empathize with the betrayed, so it is for the betrayed to understand sexual addiction cycle, to empathize and understand in time and put in context the behavior of the betrayer.
I liked you setting it next to trauma. I think that brought some clarity. I want to provide a little pushback. Are we giving permission then to unholy, sinful behavior because of some addiction cycle?
That's a good question. I would say no. It continues to be sinful. What we're trying to do is understand, how could this be? How did this come about? How could someone who loves me engage in behavior that communicates that you don't love me at all? Understanding the addiction cycle both honors and says this is clearly sin, this is clearly wrong, while also wanting to understand how is it that this came to be, and that someone, right, who loves the Lord, who wants to serve him, who came into this marriage wanting to honor their vows, now are suddenly acting out. We need to drill down without minimizing sin.
You could maybe say it this way. a good understanding of the brokenness
Yeah.
of the world, the brokenness of the soul,
Yeah.
the brokenness of the human being goes a long ways, not in permitting sin or not even dismissing sin, but explaining sin,
Yes.
which is helpful.
And our desperate need for grace. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Each one of us. Yep.
Let's move on now to the fifth signpost. You alluded to boundaries already, and I remember it specifically when you talked about triggers, that you simply said, you cannot avoid all the triggers. Then you made an allotment to say, well, there are some boundaries to be made. So let's zero in on this concept of boundaries. I get a sense that this is a key signpost here.
Yes, it is. So if you think of your house, there are certain boundary lines that communicate what is your property and what is your neighbor's property. Okay? And so when we think about recovery from sexual betrayal, it is important to make sense of what is my responsibility. I'm responsible for my thoughts, my behaviors, my emotions, and what is not my responsibility. I am not responsible for the behavior of the one that betrayed me. We set boundaries for the safety of our own heart. We don't set boundaries to control our spouse. We can't control our spouse. And that is incredibly scary in the outset.
I love that. We do this for the boundaries of my heart, to simply say, honey, what would you be comfortable with? And I'm willing to restrict myself in those areas.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's important. And that's a good example. I would say also for the one who's betrayed, one of the things that's helpful, I think, is to understand what are their needs to have safety in order for their heart to thrive. And so that's going to create boundaries for their own heart in this rebuilding process. And so for them, understanding what does that property line look for them in the context of recovery, what are the things that need to be established so that I can continue to move forward in healing?
This is the fifth signpost, and I do see it progressive. We found ourselves in disclosure in a completely unwelcome world. Trauma helps us see that unwelcome world, and triggers play on it. And then understanding the nature of sin and understanding how we got here. And we're starting now to build these boundaries to say, what kind of world do we want to live in?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How can I protect my own heart, and how can I protect your own heart? And so there is, if I would like to maybe shift, an optimistic view here, trajectory, to say, where do we want to be? And how can we build boundaries and live within these boundaries to get there?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go now to the sixth and final one, and that is forgiveness. And we can certainly see where we've come from now to have forgiveness a part of this picture. And I just want to make one observation here, Kaleb, about forgiveness, is there's a lot of signposts that are coming before it.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that you're not suggesting here that these all happen and forgiveness should be way out there. I know that's not what you're suggesting here, but I am suggesting there's some deep work that happens to get us to a restored place. So what would you say about forgiveness here?
I think the first thing, Matt, is educate oneself about forgiveness, about what forgiveness is, what forgiveness isn't.
So, for example, understanding the difference between trust and forgiveness.
Yep. Forgiveness is a debt that we are releasing, which is really an individual process. Okay? It's in the context of relationship, but it's as God forgave us, we were in debt to Him. And so He chooses to release that debt. There's no longer a debt. The trust process is mutuality. There is a relationship context. There is in forgiveness too, but this is a two-way kind of part. So trust isn't something that we give. Trust is something that's earned. So for trust to be rebuilt, the betrayer needs to act in a trustworthy manner that then earns back and builds up, right? Restores this piece of integrity and authenticity and a place that I can trust, not just what I see, but again, intentions, right?
I think you've laid that out very well, Caleb. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. And maybe I'll say it this way. It is possible to say, honey, I forgive you. I've given that debt over to Jesus, but I still don't trust you with X, Y, and Z, which really speaks to the boundaries part of the previous signpost. But that's possible to have that type of conversation.
It is, yes. And it's possible with the forgiveness piece, which I think you alluded to earlier, just to acknowledge that when we speak of forgiveness, there's both a cognitive component, I choose to forgive. There's also the whole emotional part of it that is a process, that is ongoing, if you will, to get to a point that which my choice matches my experiential reality. And so I think it's just helpful to just acknowledge, again, biblically, we are called to forgive. Absolutely. That's something each of us holds dear, while also saying, this is a process.
And I think there's a lot of hope in that too, Caleb, because I think there's a lot of people saying, I forgive and I want to forgive. I think I forgive. Have I forgiven? If I really forgive, would I have had that thought race through my head that just went through? And you're really giving space here to say that while we can forgive and give over that debt, sometimes our feelings trail behind and will in time confirm that forgiveness.
Yes. And I think being aware of that for both spouses can be a helpful thing, a hard thing, but helpful thing, Matt, in the sense that it says, because one dynamic that can come up with couples is the betrayed gets triggered, right? Flood of negative emotions. And maybe they come out externally at the betrayer. And the betrayer can explode. I thought you forgave me. You told me you forgave me.
Yeah.
And both can be true. Both there can be forgiveness, and there's a triggering of overwhelming emotions that in that moment, in that state, there's a reactivity that doesn't feel like forgiveness, but it is the process of working towards a new reality for both, a shared reality, really.
Yeah. Caleb, you work with couples. That's what you do. And sexual betrayal is something that you have seen in couples. Can you say that you have seen couples work through deep betrayal and have, in time, come out on the other side in a restored relationship with mutual respect and godly honoring their vows that they took decades before?
Yes, I can say absolutely yes, Matt. And I think it's both a beautiful thing, but also a challenging and difficult journey. But it's beautiful to see the redemption of God at work, taking something that was broken, that shattered, and redeeming, restoring, and making something beautiful out of something that was broken. And so, yes.
I think that is so exciting, and I trust our listeners are encouraged by that example. And you're speaking from a lot of data points with that. I think there's a lot of hope. What advice do you have? Speak now to couples that are enduring this at the moment.
I think one, Matt, is just to be patient and compassionate with yourself and with each other. And that's something that's an ongoing process. But that this is a confusing, disorienting, painful journey at times that is going to feel at times really hope-filled, and at other times feel like we are at square one. And so it is important to rest in the steadfast love of our Savior that is consistent, that is constant. And so being patient with each other. I think surrounding yourself with safe people that you can be raw with and not judged, in the sense that they accept you and fully love you, and they can communicate truth in your life, is critical when, again, the journey is so disorienting. And then I think this piece of seeing it as a process, seeing it that this is a journey that we're on, and it feels like at times, certainly we want to be there, but what is the Spirit bringing up in my heart in this process, and how is He communicating to me and my spouse as we walk along, that this is not a point in time, this is an ongoing journey of restoration together.
I think that's exciting, and I really like how we've kind of landed where we started. You talked about the importance of truth being the very, very first signpost. What is true? And what we have landed here is the truth of God's word. As Jesus said, the truth shall set you free. And how we bring to bear on this very broken situation the truth of Christ, the truth of his resurrection, and that he has modeled for us victory over death, over brokenness, over sin. And what you've just attested to is marriages mirror that death and resurrection, just as Jesus has done. And I think that provides so much hope to each of our listeners. We trust that this content encourages you, that you perhaps too are very likely to have a marriage that mirrors the death and resurrection of Christ in this area of sexual betrayal. Thanks, Kaleb, for sharing.
It's been a blessing to be with you.
You can find the webpage that I referenced on our website, accounseling.org. If you go to the search menu, the little magnifying glass there, and type in sexual betrayal, it will come up. And you will find really, really helpful links on each of these signposts to help guide you. So thanks, Kaleb, to each one that was here. Thanks, and God bless you.